Welcome to CNN Talk. It's a new year. Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
It seems so long since we last year.
I know.
It does.
It's kind of a different universe, Christmas now, isn't it? And the holiday season. We are talking today about this new book. And it's written by someone, Ian, that you know. It's called Fire and Fury. Michael Wolff had access to the White House. We know that much. Donald Trump is denying how much access or questioning how much access. We haven't got the book. We're hoping to get it actually during the show. But what do we know about it as far as you're aware?
Well, it's written by a journalist that the Trump people are trying to make out as some unknown. He's actually a brilliant journalist, Michael Wolff. Anyone who reads GQ, particularly, I don't know whether it's in the US edition, but certainly the UK edition, he writes in that a lot, writes for all sorts of publications and has written quite a few books in the past. And he's one of these tenacious reporters that really... People think that maybe some of his stuff is either made up or exaggerated because the first time you read it, you think, oh, my God, that cannot be true. But judging from what we know about this book so far, even if only half of what he writes is true, and I actually believe that most of it is, but if only half of it is true, it is deeply worrying, to say the least. The question we're asking, Trump White House revelations, your reaction, quite broad, because it's addressing lots of different issues as we understand it, but one of the broad issues is that it's a White House in chaos.
And, I mean, I completely agree with Ian. I think what we've all known to be true is it looks like a completely dysfunctional... It looks like a White House at war with each other. It's like civil war at the White House. It looks like staffer against staffer. You've got family members against staffers. You've got kind of Donald Trump, having a row in an empty room, just him and his cheeseburger. I mean, it's like... By the way, I love the bit about the cheeseburger. I kind of respect Trump for the fact that sometimes he just goes to bed at 6:30 with a cheeseburger. We all want to do that. I say respect to you for doing that,
You told me earlier you do that.
That's my aspiration.
Images of you late
shouting
at
my staff about my meeting coverage.
Veggie burger.
I'm a full red meeting person.
Come on.
Most of the revelations, come from Steve Bannon. A lot, who was very senior in the White House, wasn't he before he left? But some of the things he said, he predicted that Trump Jr. would crack like an egg in relation to the meetings with Russians. And Bannon also saying that Trump wanted Putin to like him. Lots of interesting analysis. But a lot of these stories aren't necessarily new either.
No, they're not. People can... The White House can deny that Michael Wolff ever had any access, though he's known to have interviewed Trump in the past. We think he's got tapes. But no one can deny that Steve Bannon had access, even though the president has tried to, because he was on the president's own staff. I think this is very significant, however much of it is true, because Trump had been trying to get a sort of positive momentum going. He's just got his tax cuts through. On this panel, we've been discussing that some of his foreign policy forays have actually shown some upside and they need to be taken seriously. And there was a sense that he was starting to get his arms around the presidency and be taken seriously. You had a lot of commentary over Christmas from Trump adversaries in the media saying it hasn't been as bad as we thought. But with this book, a lot of people will be reminded of a lot of things that made them uneasy about the Trump presidency. And so the White House now is not only trying to discredit Michael Wolff, it's also trying to discredit Steve Bannon, whose statements appear in the book and the statements that he hasn't denied. And Steve Bannon was, formerly a very senior advisor.
Sloppy Steve is his new nickname.
I think that's the sobriquet.
According to Donald Trump. Carol saying, I will not buy the book. Joanna saying, just more nonsense. Meanwhile, the Dow just broke 25,000, which is true, isn't it? Also, amazing job numbers coming out from the US right now. So does any of this gossip, as Trump calls it, matter?
None of it will stick with Trump supporters, but I think to those of us that are not Trump supporters, it confirms a lot of our worst fears. I should reveal, by the way, that somebody put on Twitter that I spoke at a conference alongside Steve Bannon in 2013, which I have to say was news to me, and I looked up, and sure enough, on the list of speakers, me and Steve Bannon... He
also had a big impact
He had no impact on me whatsoever.
I'm just surprised Ian's not publishing this book.
But I might be doing another one, but...
More on that later.
More on that anon.
The book was meant to be coming out next week. It was brought forward because of a legal letter coming from the White House. Just explain how these things work, because Ian, for those who don't know, runs a publishing company here.
The libel laws in America are very different to Britain, much stricter in Britain. My policy, whenever I get a legal letter from somebody objecting to a book that I'm publishing, is to rip it up and ignore it and not even reply to it. And in 10 years, I've never, ever been taken to court. Lots of threats, it has to be said, but you have to have a sort of, well, you have to stand up to people in this, because if you just sort of say, we might have got it wrong, they will sting you for as much money as they can. And generally, they haven't got a leg to stand on.
Donald Trump would have to open up the White House to investigators, lawyers from the other side, if you were going to pursue these allegations. It's very unlikely that he's going to, and he doesn't have a record of it
Absolutely.
either.
And it's such a counter-productive strategy, because all it has done is make people pre-order that book. It's rocketed in terms of everyone. I mean, we're all talking about
even
this
in the
book.
UK, it's #2 on the Amazon bestseller chart.
So Donald Trump has actually helped Wolf massively with this. And you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, what Donald Trump will do is double down on this is the elite, this is the establishment having a go at me, the outsider, as I said they would do. And you're right, it will make his supporters, you know, more ironclad in their kind of thinking that he is the victim.
OK. We're coming up to the TV show. We're not quite sure when they're coming to us today. So
maybe
I'm going to fill for a couple of minutes.
A bit late. Shall I tell you about the time I had Michael Wolff in the back of my car?
Yes.
Well, not in that way.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
It's back in 2004. I was a candidate for the Conservative Party, and Boris Johnson, who's now the Foreign Secretary in the UK, came up to Norfolk, where my constituency was, on a campaign visit. Unfortunately, being Boris, he got the wrong train, and I had to...
About 10 seconds.
More of that later.
More of that later. Welcome to CNN Talk, the first of 2018, and we're talking Fire and Fury. It's the book that claims to lift the lid on the Trump White House.
Did Steve Bannon betray you, Mr. President?
Thank you.
Any words about Steve Bannon?
A bombshell book by Michael Wolff, which paints a stunning picture of dysfunction in the Trump campaign and White House, and contains stunning quotes from Steve Bannon, who is, let's remember, the president's former top political advisor.
Steve Bannon called a meeting between Trump campaign officials and a Russian lawyer treasonous. Bannon reportedly said, quote, "They're going to crack Don Jr. like an egg on national TV."
The president is demanding that the publisher cease and desist from any further publication of any excerpts, and is demanding a, quote, full and complete retraction and apology.
There are numerous mistakes, but I'm not going to waste my time or the country's time going page by page talking about a book that's complete fantasy.
Nothing will ever come between us and President Trump and his agenda.
But that book is now hitting bookshelves 4 days early.
This is a 300-page book. We've only seen 5% of it.
Well, the Trump White House revelations, we want your opinions. A very broad question, because we haven't actually got the book. We're hoping to get it during the show, but lots has been leaked already. Do have your say on our Facebook feed, facebook.com/CNN International. Couple of caveats. Some of Michael Wolff's reporting hasn't been corroborated. A lot of it has. Some errors have been identified. The sourcing is quite vague at times, but also worth noting that Steve Bannon, who was Donald Trump's chief strategist, hasn't denied any of the direct quotes attributed to him. Let's just go, before we go to the panel, through some of the revelations that we know are in the book. Bannon calling Trump Tower meeting treasonous. This is when a Russian was allegedly involved in a meeting with Trump Jr. Bannon predicting that Trump Jr. would crack like an egg because of this. And Bannon saying that Trump wanted Putin to like him. Also, the book painting a picture of a very chaotic White House. Ian, you run a publishing company. You also know the author involved here. Just take us through what you think about his credibility and also how these things work.
Well, the White House are trying to trash Michael Wolff. You can understand the reason that they would want to do that. But the fact of the matter is he did have access to the White House. He was there a huge number of times. It is rumoured that he's got tapes of all of these interviews and all the rest of it. I think they're going to have major problems in damaging his credibility. He is a very professional journalist. He writes for GQ, all sorts of different publications, quite familiar in the UK as well, writes for The Guardian, I think, too. So I think that anyone who tries to damage Michael Wolff's reputation is probably going to end up with a lot of egg on their face. Now, Trump has made a very big mistake by threatening legal action, partly because the libel laws in the US are not as strict as they are in the UK, for example. And if he did actually go forward with a lawsuit, he himself would have to give evidence. Well, he's never going to do that. And as a publisher, when I've been threatened with legal action for a book, and it's happened in the last 10 years probably about 10 or 15 times, my immediate reaction is one of panic. You have that empty feeling in your stomach because we're a small company, so we can't really afford to fight a legal suit. But in the end, you have to stand up to people. And I usually just reply with 2 words, the second of which is off. And you never ever hear anything again from them. But it's quite, particularly when you have UK libel laws, it's quite a serious thing. And he could actually have we got the book coming?
Your thunder's been stolen.
Wow.
So it's not yet on sale. I think it's on sale in a couple of hours. But here's the book. Get reading.
I'll come back to you in 5 minutes.
You can have the last word.
In the meantime, let's just hear from Donald Trump. He referred to Steve Bannon very briefly yesterday. This is how he puts Bannon in his mind right now.
Did Steve Bannon betray you, Mr. President?
Thank you very
Any words about Steve Bannon?
I don't know. He called me a great man last night, so, you know, he obviously changed his tune pretty quick. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you. I don't talk to him.
We know the writer had access. We know that Steve Bannon had access and that they were very close indeed. How do you interpret Donald Trump's reaction there?
They've had the mother of all falling outs, clearly, and it seems like everybody is fighting in the White House. It's like rats fighting in a sack. There is civil war. Everyone, the staffers against staffers, family members against, staffers, Trump against everybody, having a row in an empty room with just him and his cheeseburger. I mean, the book paints, the interesting thing about the book, it paints a picture of what we all think is going on there. Anyway, all the dysfunction, the churn of staff, in the top jobs, Scaramucci. What's interesting is, why was Scaramucci only there? Why was he brought in? Well, it now turns out we're all wondering it's probably Ivanka that sort of brought him in. So what this book has done is sort of confirmed the appearance of this absolutely chaotic, dysfunctional, aggressive, combative, divided White House. The big question will be, like us political watchers will pore over every single fascinating sordid detail. The big question is, and we often return to this subject, will it actually move the needle with voters, and will it harm Trump's chances of a second term?
I'm just looking at the back, Liam. It says Donald Trump and his tiny band of campaign warriors, Steve Bannon was one of them, were ready to lose with fire and fury. They weren't ready to win. This is one of the fundamental things that comes out of the book, that they were absolutely shocked.
Trump didn't expect to win, that his wife was upset when he won, and they wanted a protest vote rather than the responsibility.
Does that matter?
Of power. I'm not sure it does matter. And following on from Aisha, I think what we'll see as a result of this book is further polarisation across the US electorate, with sort of liberal voters broadly thinking this confirms all their fears about Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's core constituency away from the coasts in America's sort of flyover zones, if you like, thinking it's just a media conspiracy. It strikes me that it's going to be very difficult for the White House to discredit Steve Bannon, even if they do try and discredit Michael Wolff. And it's unfortunate for Trump, because towards the end of the year, I remember our final show of the year in 2017, even critics of Trump had to admit that he was starting to get his arms around the presidency. Of course, the economic numbers have been very strong. Stock markets are booming. American growth numbers are very high. They're raising interest rates, and everything seems to be fine. And even some of his foreign policy forays seem to be bearing fruit. All that's now gone. There'll be wall-to-wall media coverage of this for at least the next few days, and some of the dirt will stick. But I think in the end, it will just further entrench Trump's supporters, and it will allow him to say to them, you see, the media elite's against me.
Well, Rod Deshak, agreeing with you. Companies are hiring, he's saying on Facebook, jobs coming back to America, and you're talking about a book. Rockwell saying the book should be translated into all languages, though. Pam saying great marketing ploy by the publisher. The book will make no difference. I'll come to you on that, Ian, as someone with a publishing company. I mean, Donald Trump has created a market for this book, right? By sending this legal letter.
He has done exactly the opposite of what he should have done. And this is another example of where he must have had advice not to react like this, but he goes ahead and does it anyway. We've seen a couple of other occasions this week where he's done that. But going back to Michael Wolff, this man is forensic. I remember when he was writing this profile of Boris Johnson, he spent a day with me and Boris Johnson, and it was in the back of my car for half of the day. And I remember the questions that he was asking Boris, and he followed up with me on 4 different occasions after that day, wanting to know my views on Boris and where he was like to go in the future, and asking actually all the difficult questions, just as a journalist should do.
Let's just go through, as we're talking about Michael Wolff, let's just go through his biography. A lot of people wouldn't have heard of him. He's obviously a columnist. You mentioned GQ, but also these other magazines in the US and papers and The Guardian, which you also write for. In 2008, he wrote a biography on Rupert Murdoch, which is also very controversial. Murdoch didn't like it. He profiled Trump in 2016 for The Hollywood Reporter. He was very complimentary, actually, in his previous writing about Trump and Bannon. Do you think that was just a way of getting into the White House after...
Possibly, but I mean, look, everyone, you would have just had to do some basic desk research and work out that, as Ian said, this guy is like a serious journalist. He's going to go in without fear or favour, as a good journalist should do. But I think what's so interesting about this, and I've worked in politics, I've worked in the equivalent of the White House, I worked in Downing Street at the end of Gordon Brown's time as Prime Minister, and there was a lot of stories coming out about how dysfunctional Number 10 Downing Street was at that time, Gordon's temper, the fact that lots of the staff are against each other. And do you know what? Pretty much all of those stories were true.
You know, there was a book by Tom Bauer, who's kind of the UK equivalent of Michael Wolff in a way, about Gordon Brown. And I read that book, and it had all of that sort of stuff in it. And at the end of it, I was thinking, how can this man be Prime Minister? But even if only half of what Michael Wolff says is true, it's still damning.
And that was towards the end of a period of office, not at the beginning of a period of office.
And Liam, let's just have a look at Trump's response then. Obviously, it came in a tweet. I authorised zero access to the White House, actually turned him down many times for the author of this phony book, Wolff, who we're talking about. I never spoke to him for a book full of lies, misrepresentations and sources that don't exist. Look at this guy's past and watch what happens to him and Sloppy Steve, a reference to Bannon. He has had some inaccuracies in his journalism in the past. But what do you feel about the overall sense of the book?
Well, I think the book is, you know, it's brilliantly marketed. I wouldn't say that Michael Wolff is a sort of Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter. He's obviously part journalism, part showbiz. I think that's a fair comment. But Donald Trump has, as Ian says, made exactly the wrong response. He's made the response by launching legal action of a businessman rather than of somebody who has genuine political savvy. He is going to have to endure a lot of negative publicity about this. The question is, will the revelations in this book, when they are tried and tested and the tyres are kicked by people like, say, Robert Mueller, special counsel, who's investigating the meetings with lawyers linked to the Russian government before the campaign with Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., will those revelations, allegations, whatever you want to call them, stand up when subjected not to a court of law, but to a proper examination by bodies of state?
On Tuesday, on my radio show, we were talking about Trump's tweet about the nuclear button, sort of mine's bigger than yours. And I remember saying during that programme, I think that Donald Trump is psychologically unbalanced. I remember saying, there, I've said it. So knock me down if you want. Well, that's the most damaging revelation to me in this book. This is the fact, well, I say the fact, the allegation that he repeats the same story time after time, 3 times in 10 minutes.
Well, it's a very sensitive subject, this, isn't it? But let's look at what's out there already on this. So the Times front page saying Trump's mental health questioned by top aide. This is from Bandy Lee. Now, she's a Yale psychologist. She briefed Congress recently on Mr. Trump. This is what she said. Mr. Trump is showing signs of impairment that the average person could not see. He's becoming very unstable very quickly. As he's unraveling, he seems to be losing his grip on reality and reverting to the conspiracy theories. And finally, just this from Brian Stelter, if I can pull that up as well. This is our media correspondent. He's reported very closely. That's not the right graphic.
It's a good one,
That's
though.
the Jack Nicholson in The Shining.
Exactly. Here's
That's
Stevie
amazing.
referring to Steve Bannon. But I'll come to you on this, Aisha, because we don't want to question his mental health without seeing his mental records, which we're not going to see.
I just think we have to be
But is it fair?
I think we have to be careful about that. Again, when I worked for Gordon Brown, this was an accusation that was sort of bandied about as well. It's actually a very easy, cheap shot to immediately go to someone's mental health. And I'll tell you something, most people that actively seek out power have got something slightly psychologically
I think
flawed
that
about
there is
them.
a difference here. Psychological flaws, that was the allegation against Gordon Brown, made by somebody relatively close to him. That's very different from this kind of allegation, which is effectively saying that he's in the early stages of dementia.
Let's hear from Sarah Sanders on this as well. We need to hear their view.
It's disgraceful and laughable. If he was unfit, he probably wouldn't be sitting there and wouldn't have defeated the most qualified group of candidates the Republican Party has ever seen. This is an incredibly strong and good leader. That's why we've had such a successful 2017 and why we're going to continue to do great things as we move forward in this administration.
To be talking about the president's mental health is a very serious issue.
It's almost the stuff of fiction, and there are novels knocking around talking about US presidents, novels that have been published since Donald Trump took office, talking about US presidents being thrown out of office because they are mentally unstable. I mean, the US Constitution does allow for that. I think it's Article 25. It does strike me, though, as something we've got to be very careful about. And as Aisha rightly says, this is really low politics. Yeah, we can hear from academics from Yale. There's a market for that kind of commentary at the moment. So ambitious people are going to step into the public eye and substantiate those, at least, allegations. I think a lot of the American public will be looking on and thinking that the political classes have gone completely mad, actually. As long as the economy holds up, and it is holding up, as long as America can conduct a foreign policy which is seen to be broadly legitimate and isn't either overly soft or overly sacrificing of servicemen and women for the US armed forces, then I think Trump still has a very, very good chance of securing a second term. And I say that objectively and not as a supporter of Trump.
I think going down this mental health thing, you've got to be really, really careful about. But I do think a lot of people will think, what a tragedy to have the White House, the greatest office arguably on the planet, inhabited by somebody who didn't really want the job, who's not kind of intellectually equipped, not about sort of dementia and things, just clearly not intellectually equipped to do the job, and hasn't got the capacity, doesn't understand how to do the job. I think that's one of the things that will actually dismay a lot of people.
But I don't buy this talk about we have to be careful about talking about this sort of thing. When a president displays all the signs of having some sort of issues, if we don't talk about it, we then get people saying, oh, it's typical, the media and political class is sort of sticking with their own, there'll be a cover-up. So actually, let's talk about it and make sure that America does not have a president who has these problems. Let him be psychologically examined as well as physically examined.
Hillary on Facebook saying, I totally agree with the part of the book that says the White House is in crisis. Karen saying the book isn't released for a few more hours. They only have excerpts. I bet the rest of it is much more juicy. Well, we've got the book here, and people will be reading it over the course of the day, and lots more will be coming out. We'll be talking about it as well after this break for TV viewers, but on Facebook we'll continue taking your comments. And they turned it around pretty quickly, didn't they?
It's amazing, because I didn't think this was actually going to be published in this country until like a couple of days ago. But they must have printed it before Christmas.
Should we just take a random page and have a look at it? So here we are, 197. On Trump's part, this was arguably something of a larger misunderstanding. Not a good paragraph to pick up on. It says here, Trump himself was desperately wounded by his treatment in the mainstream media. He obsessed on every slight until he was taken by the next slight. It does feel, doesn't it, as if there's lots of firefighting.
That's just somebody who lacks frontline political experience. I mean, even us, sort of, lowly hacks, we have to endure a lot of personal attacks and personal slights. And if you
that's enough about my
that's just me from you guys.
If you stand for election to the most powerful office on earth, then you of course are going to. I don't buy this thing though, that he didn't want power. I don't think he would have put himself through everything that he did put himself through had he not wanted
the theory
to win.
It was a marketing exercise.
I don't know about that. Because in a way, Jeremy Corbyn in this country, there's a similar argument where he went in the race to create a kind of frame, didn't expect to win, and suddenly was like, wow.
Tricia then saying the Donald's biggest enemy is the Donald himself, and that's partly what this book is saying, isn't it?
Yeah, and day after day, you just take a random tweet of his, and he is an enemy to himself, and he's clearly not capable of taking advice, because there are good people that work in the White House. There are people that day after day advise him not to tweet that, not to write that, not to issue that ridiculous statement that he issued about Steve Bannon. What did he hope to achieve by that? Because he just looked like a giant school kid.
Let's listen to Steve Bannon when we come out of the break as well, because we need to hear from him, because he then says he's a great president as well on his radio show.
Steve Bannon has to be careful how he portrays it, because he's stuck the knife in with the book, which brings him back into the public realm. You know, he's not a has-been anymore, he's now a player. And now he says that the president's a great man and I support him every day. So, you know, he's trying to ride both horses. On the one hand, wanting to get his name out there. On the other hand, wanting to look decent and not too disloyal.
It's hard to look decent when you're like a Nazi sympathiser.
Allegedly, according to Aisha. OK, we're coming back to the TV show, and I've just moved the book, which they carefully placed on the desk.
In London, live.
Well, this is what we're talking about today. It's the book that claims to lift the lid on the Trump White House. It was written by Michael Wolff. He did have access to the White House, but Donald Trump is now denying or sort of questioning how much access he actually had. Donald Trump, obviously, one star of the book. The other one is Steve Bannon, his former chief strategist. Lots of revelations coming from him, which he doesn't deny. Lots of comments coming in. David on Facebook saying the Trump-Bannon storm has been brewing for a long time now. This is no surprise. But listen to Steve Bannon speak on his radio show after the book Revelations came out.
The President of the United States is a great man. You know, I support him day in and day out, whether going through the country, giving the Trump miracle speech or on the show or on the website. So I don't think you have to worry about that. But I appreciate the kind words.
How do we make sense of Steve Bannon if he says one thing in the book and then talks about Trump being a great man?
Does everyone have a radio show these days? Am I the only president that doesn't have a radio
show?
You did over Christmas.
Over Christmas. I forgot about that. I was very supportive of the president. So, now there's an expression, isn't there? Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I think you could now add political advisor into that frame. And generally, when political advisors who have been very close to their bosses, and when you're a senior political advisor, you almost have a relationship which is way above and beyond a professional relationship. You're like a counsellor, you're like a confidant, you often speak to that person more than anybody else. So when you fall out big time. That happened in the United Kingdom. David Cameron fell out with Steve Hilton, who was his former advisor, and this has happened. So Steve Bannon knows how much damage he is doing to Donald Trump. And trust me, he is not going to kind of hold back. He can sugarcoat it by saying, you know, I think he's a great man and I worked for him. But every bit of poison he drips against the president will have so much more potency. And the other thing that's, I think, really important to kind of note in all of this is, I think, again, I'm going to challenge you on the dementia thing, because I think all of this, even though embarrassing details going to come out about cheeseburgers, dyeing his own hair badly, etc., etc., this is all a very useful diversion tactic away from the real stuff that matters. How is he actually doing his job? The Russia investigation, is he actually making life better for people? A lot of Trump thrives in an environment of severe disruption and chaos and diversion. And I think, actually, this is probably going to help him in a way.
You've talked, Ian, about North Korea potentially being the big story of 2018, and Donald Trump tweeted on that somewhere, but not on the screen behind me. What he tweeted was the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on the desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I too have a nuclear button, but it's much bigger and more powerful than his, and my button actually works.
I mean, it's like two schoolboys going behind a bike shed, isn't it, and doing what schoolboys do.
Somebody tweeted me saying, did he get the big button from a McDonald's Happy Meal?
But as we look ahead to 2018, in terms of the revelations in the book, what does that mean to his actual policy making?
Well, what it means is that there is a huge fear that President Trump and Kim Jong-un could actually start a war, hopefully not nuclear, but there could be some sort of military action precipitated by things like this. And it is unfathomable to most sensible people as to how a president of the United States, A, does that, and B, is allowed by all of his advisors to do that.
On the other hand, we've got the Dow. If we look at that over the course of the year, you referred to it earlier as well. Does he just need to keep the economy strong, keep jobs going up, share prices going up, to divert any sort of attention he gets from the book?
Well, as a political advisor, not as famous as Steve Bannon, James Carville, of course, once said, it is the economy, stupid. And I hold to that. Stocks and shares are booming. The US growth figures are very, very strong. We've got the congressional midterms coming up in November of this year, which will be a key litmus test. I still maintain that while this will polarise the US electorate, it will confirm in the minds of liberals with a small L everything they don't like about Trump, and it will confirm in the minds of people who aren't political obsessives that the media and political elite are against Donald Trump. It may also actually galvanise the Republican Party to stand behind him, just as the tax cuts that Donald Trump got through Congress just before Christmas will galvanise the Democrats against him. So I think this is going to make US politics even more febrile, even more divisive, and for ordinary people looking on, I think they'll be tearing their hair out.
I think the extremes will not change their opinions, but the 10 to 20% of the electorate who are fair-minded, who aren't particularly tribal, the swing voters, I think this could tip them over the edge and say, well,
back towards the Democrats.
This is just it. The other point, and it's often very lazy to make Watergate comparisons here, but remember the number of President Nixon's close aides who were either forced out of the White House or resigned, and then his relationships with them afterwards. We know from all the books that were released about some of the conversations that were continuing. It wouldn't at all surprise me if Bannon and Trump actually did still speak in some strange way.
I don't know. I think it looks like things. I mean, my only hope as a liberal person is that when, you know, my hope is that the right is going to slightly start cannibalising each other, because when a faction turns in on itself, you know, divided sides don't tend to do that well. That is my only hope against, you know, people, you know, having a second look at Trump. I mean, we have talked about the North Korea thing. You talk about the international policy being okay. His international policy has not been that good. His international policy is he gets on a plane and he gets out
of,
like...
it's been that good, but it hasn't been that bad.
Yeah, but, you know,
and that's an achievement for him.
I will look at Jerusalem. I mean, we could have a terrible situation about to kick off in the Middle East, which we have sort of discussed before. We've got this very, very febrile situation. And, you know, you've got these... I suppose the thing about his character is he is a man who nobody has probably ever really had the guts to say no to. So he's lived in this bubble of extreme wealth and then, you know, commercial success or failure, depending on where, you know, he's a TV star. He's had, he's not a political insider, but he's not like a normal person either. He's probably a narcissist in the most extreme version of it.
But as Liam often says, where are the Democrats on this? I'm reading Donna Brazil's book, Hack, at the moment. I mean, they're sort of like ferrets in a sack as well. There's nobody there providing any opposition whatsoever.
Chibere saying this is just a distraction, a publisher's means of making a quick buck and a bad decision.
Perish the thought.
From the publishing corner. This book isn't released for a few more hours. They only have experts. I bet the rest is even more juicy. Lauren's saying so much gossip. I don't care about the internal affairs of the White House as long as the country is led correctly.
Well, that is the...
But I'm going to leave the final word to Meryl. She's talking about the book. She says, make America read again.
Well done, Meryl.